Everyone, and welcome to the launch of Solar Power Europe's EU Jobs Report 2021. When we published our last edition of our job report at the beginning of 2018, solar was still in its transition phase in Europe. That time we employed around 80,000 people. Now, almost 4 years later, picture looks completely different. Solar is responsible for over 4 times as many jobs in the EU. Indeed, there's some good reasons for solar's positive developments, and decision makers increasingly are becoming aware of this. So, solar is now often the lowest cost power generation source in the EU, even in northern parts, and with a cost structure continuing to improve further for many years to come. So if you combine solar's cost advantage with solar being also the most flexible and easy to deploy power technology, from very small household applications to gigantic utility scale power plants, then you have an explanation why the EU solar sector actually installed already over 1/3 more power capacity than its closest follower in 2020. A lead which we believe solar is unlikely to give away in the future. Actually, our modeling shows that solar power will become by far, really we have to emphasize by far, the EU's major energy provider in the long run. And that makes it imperative to take a close look at the development of solar jobs in Europe at a time when policymakers are working on the details to enable the European Green Deal. However, as sunny as solar power's future looks at first sight, we will need to install much more and do that much faster than what most policymakers have in their roadmaps, plans, or what we see in legislation so far for the European Union to comply with the 1.5-degree Paris climate goals. That's why we actually also have chosen the report's subtitle, which is called Towards Higher Solar Ambitions in Europe. In the next, now it's only 55 minutes, we will first have my colleague, just go one file further. Oops, that's me. We will first have my colleague Raffaele Rossi, who is the Senior Policy and Market Analyst at Solar Power Europe, provide an overview of our study results before our CEO, Walburga Hemmetsberger, will discuss our policy recommendations with a representative of the Commission. We have with us Jacek Truczynski, who's the Deputy Head of Unit at DG GROW, and Ulrich Hadding, who's the CFO and also responsible for HR and legal at Europe's leading solar inverter manufacturer, SMA Solar Technology. Ulrich is also a board member of Solar Power Europe. Before I give the floor to Raffaele, I would like to express on behalf of Solar Power Europe our sincere thanks to Vlarik Business School, Brussels, which built a mathematical model for this job report. And personally, I would like to also say thank you a lot to Solar Power Europe's entire team for making this report possible. Raffaele, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael, and also good morning on my side. I would get control of the slides now. Okay, let's start. So maybe as a recap of what's going on in the solar market in the EU, as you know, in accordance with the European Union goals for carbon neutrality by 2050 and the corresponding 2030 target of -55% GHG emissions, solar will play a key role in the green transition. It is the largest growing renewable energy technology, both at EU level and at global level. And in recent years, the sector has also surpassed expectations in terms of cost reduction and growth rate. Focusing on the EU market in 2020, which you can see in the slide, demand has grown by 17% to 19.8 gigawatts of newly installed capacity compared to the previous year. And this surprising growth took place in a year, let's remember, when the health crisis severely negatively impacted the global and EU economy, and there were hard lockdown measures imposed to many EU countries. So this performance, which is positively surprising, is the second best ever for solar, which is only topped by 2011 when 21.4 gigawatts were installed. And most importantly, solar is here to stay. The preliminary results of our upcoming EU market outlook, which are coming next month, show sustained growth for solar across the EU. We know very well solar's good performance when it comes to cost and versatility, but one less known solar benefit is job friendliness. In fact, no other power generation technology is as job intense as solar, which creates 2 to 6 times more jobs than any of its peers during the construction phase. So on the one hand, we have rooftop solar, which you can see in the top right corner, which is somewhat more expensive than multi-megawatt size solar parks, of course, but is also more job intensive. And on the other hand, utility scale solar still creates more job than any other energy source, and it is also a leader when it comes to CO2 abatement costs. So let's look at the methodology very quickly for you to understand how we come up with this analysis. Job studies typically use 2 types of methodologies primarily for calculating employment in a sector. One option is to use employment factors across the value chain to determine direct job creation. And employment factors are expressed in full-time equivalents, so FTEs per megawatt gained from the activities in different parts of the value chain. The other most common option is to use a CapEx OpEx model, so looking at investments, which is also called follow the money approach. And essentially, this method calculates direct jobs based on annual and cumulative installed capacity, while using values for CapEx and OpEx expenditures to calculate direct jobs. In this study, we chose a hybrid approach that uses both methodologies, depending on the value chain level we were investigating. So we took into consideration 4 main value chain segments: manufacturing, deployment, operation and maintenance, and the commissioning and recycling, or end of life. We use these employment factors for manufacturing and the commissioning and recycling, and we use the CapEx OpEx model for deployment and O&M. This is for the quantification of the direct jobs, but on top of that, we have the direct jobs that are jobs linked to core activities, such those that have been mentioned, but there are also indirect jobs that are a result of business-to-business purchases across the supply chain, for example, research and development, and many others that are considered immediate, but still connected to the sector. To quantify the indirect jobs of solar PV investments, this report has used an input-output table that uses the 27 EU member states and 63 sectors that cover all economic activities with data provided by Eurostat. The input-output table then includes FTE multipliers that allows us to calculate indirect jobs based on direct jobs. All results are annual, meaning job creation provided by year. So the FTEs that are required to fulfill the demand for the corresponding year. And lastly, we do not count induced jobs, which are jobs created through money flows resulting from, for example, household spending of labor income. So this is without the scope, outside the scope of the study. Importantly, we used 3 main scenarios for the calculation of deployment, operation and maintenance, and the commissioning and recycling. And these 3 scenarios are based on the typical Solar Power Europe market intelligence scenario, which are based on the global market outlook and European market outlook. So essentially a low, medium, and high scenario. However, for the calculation of the manufacturing scenarios, we used a different approach this time. We calculated the scenarios based on the level of achievement of the European Solar Initiative led by Solar Power Europe with other partners, which aims to develop 20 gigawatts of solar production across the whole value chain by 2025. We developed this scenario based on the level of achievement or partial achievement of this target by 2025. So the low scenario essentially has a steady amount of polysilicon in the global market share, but there are no expansions of ingots and wafers production, which is low at the moment in Europe. Same for cells. Current plans actually do lead to factory openings, but no others are developed. Modules is growing but connected to cell expansion. Inverters grow but decrease their relative global market share. A moderate scenario equals to a partial achievement of the ESI target. Polysilicon retains a 20% global market share. Most strikingly, the differences are in ingots and wafers and cells, because the most serious announcement in cell factories get financing and open by 2025, and resulting production capacity for ingot, wafer, modules also grow. And finally, for inverters, the expansion takes place and retains the global market share. And lastly, the high scenario equals to a value chain wide capacity production of 20 gigawatts. So ingots, wafers, cell expand to 20 gigawatt production. Polysilicon, as in the other scenario, retains a 20% market share. Modules production grows accordingly, and inverters grows and increases global market share. Now let's look at the results. Sorry. Okay, U27 solar job market. If we look at the jobs created by solar last year, so in 2020, 300,057 FTEs have been created by the solar sector across the EU. 150,000 of them are direct FTEs, so 42% of the total, whereas 2,700 are indirect jobs. As you can see, deployment jobs are by far the majority of the jobs and account to 283,000. O&M jobs are 35,000, manufacturing 23,000, and the rest is end-of-life jobs. The great majority of the jobs, as said, let's see if it loads. Yes, the great majority of the jobs are associated with solar deployment activities. Operation and maintenance retain at 10% of the total, and the remaining shares are manufacturing at 6% and recycling and decommissioning at 4%. The predominance of deployment jobs over the others, especially operation and maintenance jobs, is a consequence of the fact that solar PV has a rather high capex intensity and a low OPEX intensity, which means that jobs are created rather at installation phase, whereas it is less intensive when it comes to operation and maintenance. And lastly, for decommissioning and recycling, it's a small portion of total FTEs, as the solar PV waste stream are still low in volume, but we anticipate to see significant solar PV waste volumes from 2030 onwards, when the first larger wave of installed systems in Europe will reach the end of their lifetime. Let's focus a little bit on solar farm manufacturing jobs. These are clearly closely linked to the production capacity that are currently present in the EU. So the EU PV industry has significant manufacturing capacities in certain steps of the value chain, primarily polysilicon, inverters, and to some extent also modules. You can see clearly from this graph, because inverter manufacturing provides about 11,000 direct and indirect jobs, which is nearly half of total manufacturing jobs. Polysilicon and module production provide 29% and 22% of total manufacturing jobs respectively, which is equal to 7,000 and 5,000 jobs. And by contrast, there is a lack of production capacity for ingots and wafer and cells within the EU today, which means that cumulatively both of them provide less than 1,000 jobs. Job intensity is also higher for cell and module production, low for inverters and ingot wafer, and very low for polysilicon production. So this is explaining why polysilicon production, despite having a higher equivalent production output than inverters and modules, generates fewer direct jobs. We also focused on the countries that provide most jobs. Here, there are some surprises. Actually, over 90% of solar jobs, which is about a quarter of the total jobs, were created in Poland in 2020. So the country is the largest provider of solar jobs in the EU. And this appears surprising because you can see on the yellow bars that the country is not the largest market, it's only the fourth largest market, and is not even a very large PV manufacturer either. So this apparent contradiction is due to a combination of factors. One is the fact that the bulk of its annual 2.4 gigawatt market is mostly comprised of residential PV systems, which are, as mentioned, the most intensive segment. So installations of rooftop system create more jobs than larger PV systems in the C&I or utility scale segment. And the second important factor is that the gross labor cost in the country are much lower than in any other European gigawatt scale market, which are otherwise located in Western and Central Europe and have quite higher labor costs. So the availability of lower labor costs leads to more jobs created. And the trend is also visible actually in Greece as well, which is not even a gigawatt market, but still is fifth in rank in job contribution. The largest PV markets in Europe, Germany, Spain, Netherlands, are also present in the top 5 with 79,000 for 40,000 and 27,000 FTEs respectively. And to complement this, some of these jobs stem from the rooftop segment, actually quite a lot of them. In gigawatt scale PV markets such Germany and Netherlands, over 75% of the jobs are connected to the rooftop segment. And in the top 7 of the larger contributors, there is only one noteworthy exception, which is Spain. So as you know, the Iberian market is dominated by utility scale solar, and only 28% of total jobs are associated with the rooftop segment. So as a result, job creation throughout the EU27 is clearly skewed towards rooftop PV, which you can see in the bottom bar of the right-hand side graph, which provides rooftop 80% of total FTEs. Let's now look at the prospects for 2021 to 2025. Thanks to the strong growth of the annual market that we expect in 2021, which is actually taking place as we speak, solar jobs are also set to rise significantly with an anticipated 30% increase year on year, which would result in 463,000 jobs in 2021. According to our median scenarios, further growth could lead to 584,000 jobs in 2025, and that is a remarkable 64% growth compared to 2020 levels. However, in the modeling of our 3 scenarios, we also signal that with an increased policy ambition leading to higher deployment and reaching the European Solar Initiative manufacturing targets, solar job could be as high as 768,000 in 2025, which would equal to 115% growth compared to 2020. However, in our low scenario, which anticipates limited market growth and failing reaching the ESI target, solar jobs would barely increase from 2020 levels with only 371,000 FTEs a year in 2025, or a bare 4% growth. Let's focus one more on manufacturing, but in a prospect perspective. The amount of jobs created in the PV manufacturing scenario will essentially greatly depend on the extent to which the European Solar Initiative targets are reached. And according to our medium scenario, whereby ESI targets are partially achieved, in 2021, EU manufacturing jobs grow 29% to 30,000 FTEs. At the end of our forecasting period, so 2025, these jobs will have increased by 122%, reaching 51,000 jobs. In a low ambition scenario with limited EU growth and not reaching the European manufacturing targets we have set, the job growth will be 10% in 2021 and 41% in 2025. However, if we have the right political support to establish a strong manufacturing base in the EU and decrease also supply chain transparency as a dependency from third countries, domestic solar manufacturing jobs could reach 35,000 units in 2021 and as much as 74,000 units in 2025, which is equal to a growth by 52% and 222% respectively. It's important also to mention that this growth would take place in all value chain segments, including 5,000 jobs from wafer and ingot production and 17,000 jobs from cell production, which today barely contribute to employment. And last but not least, reaching the ESI target would also mean raising manufacturing jobs, module manufacturing jobs, from 5,000 to 19,000 in 2025, and inverter jobs from 11,000 to 22,000 by the same year. Looking at how growth take place in deployment jobs and solar O&M jobs, we can see a few things about this growth trend. First of all, the growth will take place in both segments, but with different growth paths. Activities in deployment are expected to generate 375,000 jobs in 2021, so a 32% raise from 2020. But beyond 2021, despite our medium scenario forecast continued annual solar capacity growth, deployment jobs will actually increase only to a limited extent and actually decrease marginally in 2022. And this can be explained by the termination of the Polish support scheme for small-scale installation, which has provided an exceptional contributor to job creation. But nevertheless, in 2025, deployment jobs will reach 434,000 units, up 35% from today's values. And in contrast, unlike the deployment jobs, which rely primarily on annual PV markets and are more susceptible to yearly fluctuations, O&M jobs are more stable. They depend on total operating solar fleet, so they're also easier to forecast. And consequently, we expect these jobs to undergo a steady two-digit growth between 2021 and 2025 without any major bumps. The 36,000 jobs created by O&M today will grow 15% to 41,000 in 2021 and 82% to 65,000 in 2025. Okay, oops. Looking at the prospects of the top FTE countries, Germany is going to be the largest market in that year and is also poised to be ranked first in the provision of solar jobs with 137,000 FTEs in the medium scenario. So the largest economy will not only retain the annual the largest EU annual market until 2025, but also continue to operate the largest solar fleet and the largest manufacturing capacity across the value chain. Second rank is Poland, which will give up the first rank to Germany. Job creation will decrease after the exceptional performance granted by the residential PV support scheme, but the country will remain a major contribution to EU solar jobs with 62,000 FTEs in the medium scenario. And in addition to France, Spain, Greece, and the Netherlands, which are already in the top job contributors list today, it is a surprise to see the presence of Romania in this top 7. And the reason is that we expect the Romanian market to reach the gigawatt scale by then, with a relevant share of rooftop PV system and the availability of lower labor cost compared to EU markets of similar size, which would lead to higher employment levels. In our medium scenario, the top 7 markets will provide 419,000 FTEs, which is about 72% of total EU jobs. And last but not least, let's have a quick outlook to our forecast to 2030. Future EU solar job creation will be influenced by the level of ambition in setting the new EU renewable energy target by 2030. And this study models the effect of the European Commission 30% renewables target on solar employment and compares it with our own 45% RES target that we campaign for. The lower level of ambition of the 40% target results in fewer installed capacities and, as a consequence, a lower number of solar jobs. So with the 40% targets, solar jobs would double compared to today's level, reaching 742 FTEs in 2030, so a quite remarkable growth. But if the ambition in solar's contribution to the EU energy transition would be increased as part of a 45% RES target, solar jobs would actually triple, so exceed 1 million jobs by 2030 and actually reaching 1.1 million. So in other words, solar contribution to the EU employment will become prominent even with a lesser level of climate ambition, but at the same time, this analysis shows that raising the bar to 2030 RES targets would not only be Paris aligned, but also would enable a more efficient cost of energy transition and create over 1 million solar jobs in the EU. And focusing on the differences between the 40% and the 45% targets impacts. In the 40% scenario, so about 750,000 jobs are created across this value chain. Like in 2020, the majority of the jobs are still belonging to the deployment sector, but the contribution from other value chain segments will have increased both in absolute and relative terms. Manufacturing would amount to 132,000 jobs, making up 18% of total jobs. On top of that, about 100,000 jobs will come from operation and maintenance, and 57,000 jobs from the commissioning and recycling would also be created. Again, raising the ambition to a 45% RES scenario would create 358,000 additional solar jobs. Most of these jobs would be created in the deployment segment due to the growth of installed capacities. So this growth would be equal to 70% compared to the 40% RES scenario. And further, the increase in the cumulative installed capacity also means more operation and maintenance jobs, which would also grow 37% in comparison to the 40% scenario. By contrast, the commissioning and recycling job increases only marginally, and marginal, as you can imagine, since the effects of extra installed capacity on these jobs will only take place in the long term. And lastly, our models assume that a stronger renewable ambition for 2030 does not have an impact on new solar manufacturing capacity, and this is why the manufacturing jobs do not change in the two scenarios. However, a more ambitious RES target for 2030 would clearly send a political signal to the industry, so it can be also assumed that these manufacturing jobs would grow. So just as a recap of this presentation, in 2020, about 350,000 FTEs were employed in the EU sector, solar sector. Most of them belong to the deployment segment, whereas only 6% of the FTEs, about 22K, work in the solar manufacturing today. EU solar jobs are set to rise 30% this year, resulting in 463 FTEs due to a strong market expansion that we clearly see in our market analysis. And with a view to 2025, we would expect 584,000 jobs by that year. The growth in the manufacturing jobs will depend on investment support, and meeting our 20 gigawatts European Solar Initiative target would result in as many as 74,000 manufacturing jobs, so grow by over 200% compared to today's level. And last but not least, with a 40% RES target, solar jobs would double compared to today, but with a Paris compliant 45% target, they would actually triple and exceed 1 million jobs by 2030. So with this, I finish my presentation and I give back the floor to Michael. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Raffaele. We will, oops, can you see me? Okay, now I'm back on screen. Okay, so thanks, Raffaele, for this nice overview. So what we would like to do now is have the panel discuss our policy recommendations. As Raffaele has shown, we anticipate growth, but we see potential for even larger growth if certain boundary conditions are met. And that's why we have now with us Jacek Truczynski, Deputy Head of Unit DG GROW of the European Commission, and Ulrich Hadding, Managing Board Member, Finance, HR and Legal at European inverter manufacturer SMA Solar Technology. And the fire chat will be moderated by our CEO, Walburga Hemmetsberger. The floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thanks a lot. So our first job report is out. I'm very proud, and thanks very much again to the whole market intelligence team, to Michael, you and Raffaele. I think it's a great delivery. I don't see Jacek yet, but I hope he will join us going forward.
I am here, Walburga.
Perfect. Hi, Jacek.
Sorry, I had problems downloading the app, but I am in.
Okay, fantastic. So we are all set. I have the great pleasure of discussing with you, Jacek, and with you, Ulrich, now in the next half an hour, what these figures, which were just presented by Raffaele, mean, what are the opportunities and how we can harvest these opportunities. Let me start with the renewables goal, which Raffaele just mentioned also in different settings. Glasgow is really the talk of town. I've taken the train this morning to work. It has been on the screen, big news, COP26. People were talking about it in the train, whether they are going to buy an electric car next. So it's really the talk of town. Everyone's looking at our global leaders, and everyone's hoping that they would really achieve good negotiation results, leading us up to reaching the goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius. The European Commission has presented its ideas already for the milestone 2030, the Fit for 55 package. And I would like to zoom in on one element, which is the renewables target, which the Commission proposed, 40%. According to our modeling, 40% will not be enough to get us on track for the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal. What we are asking is 45% renewable goal. And just relating back to the figures that Raffaele just presented, and as a reminder, so 40% renewables target would translate into roughly 740,000 jobs in Europe, green jobs, whereas going for a 45% target would add more than 300,000 jobs and would get us as much as 1.1 million jobs. So it's not just about deploying more renewables and the benefits of renewables, it's also about green jobs. And Jacek, my first question goes to you in this regard. Have you considered in the discussions, in the broad discussions obviously you had before presenting your Fit for 55 package, have you considered a higher target beyond the 40% you have been proposing? Or and if not, is there still room for improvement?
Thanks, Walburga. Well, personally, I was not involved in these negotiations, but from my past experience working on economic modeling that underpinned previous Commission proposals, I can say that indeed the Commission looks at different scenarios as part of such exercises. I think, as far as I know, in this case, the range of scenarios included also different objectives for renewables, different objectives for energy efficiency, and I think a single objective for greenhouse gas emissions. So you set your objectives for greenhouse gas emissions, and then you see through the model what is the most cost-effective way of achieving that target, whether it's by pushing more energy efficiency, and then as part of energy efficiency, more households or maybe more industry, and then you look also at the renewables and what should be the overarching objective, and then underneath whether we should again push more for renewables in one sector or another. And I think that the way the model then plots those results shows you the optimal mix between greenhouse gas emission objectives, renewables, and energy efficiency. And in the end, the outcome of that, and of course, there's a little bit of politics in that as well. It's not just mathematics or economic modeling that lead the Commission to a specific proposal. But what I'm saying is that it's underpinned by strong economic analysis, and that was the basis for what the Commission proposed. What the Commission proposed. Now the question: is there scope to do more? I think if you look at the initial comments we have from member states, and some of that information, of course, is public because council deliberations are public, the summaries, you can see that there's clearly a group of member states that, let's say, are more progressive, Sweden, Netherlands, Finland, that push for higher ambition. Then, of course, there are those member states, including my home member state, which argue rather that this ambition should be lowered. And of course, I think in the context of this discussion today, I think it's hard to say currently what the outcome will be, but of course, this sort of results that you produced in the study helped these discussions, because they help them to be evidence-based, and some of this evidence is indeed showing that what the Commission is arguing, that higher ambition brings additional growth, additional jobs, is indeed what is expected to happen, also according to other models, as those used in your study. And I think even more useful than the modeling results, because you can always argue whether the assumptions are correct or not. And the longer term perspective you have, the more argument you can have. But I think what is even more useful here is, for example, what you have indicated. Poland today is the biggest market for PVs in the EU. I think that's clearly an argument that should be used in those negotiations to push for higher ambition. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Jacek. And indeed, I mean, political discussions will be probably also impacted by the high energy prices and the outcome of Glasgow. But turning to you, Ulrich, can the industry deliver higher ambitions and higher renewable targets, meaning more solar panels, more inverters as well? You produce inverters, deploying faster. So can the industry deliver? We don't hear you yet.
The clear-cut answer is yes, we can. Let me first embrace what Jacek says about the 45% renewable goal. I think it would be prudent to really get politics going. I understand that this might not be easy, but as SMA is active in all regions of the world, and we have our own intelligence been working on that question, I think it would be a pity if we see Europe then falling behind other regions in the accelerated growth of renewables in the coming years, if we do not plan early ahead of time. And not only, I think 45% is the only way to be Paris compliant, I think that industry will drive that anyway. And if we do not put the framework in that regard, that would really be a shortfall. And to your question, Walburga, can we then deliver the necessary production equipment? I think we have already laid some exemplary evidence to that when we are looking on the years of 2008 to 2012, where the manufacturing capacities in Europe were doubling every year in order to meet the peaked demand at that time. It is possible, certainly for the inverter business, as this is not very capital intense, as it is more about jobs and qualifications rather than about equipment. Our installed capacity today peaks at least 20 gigawatt. We can certainly expand that over the coming years to double, if not triple, easily.
Thanks, Ulrich. I would like to put a little bit of a spotlight on solar and the role of solar now. Forecasting solar is a history of being overtaken, but really at full speed by reality. In the last couple of years, the development surprised us year on year in a very positive way. So our own modeling, and now there's a couple of numbers. That's why we are supporting it with a graph, so you can follow these numbers here on your screen. Our own modeling shows that in the moderate scenario, that without any further ambition, so not rolling up our sleeves going forward as we did in the last couple of years, in 2030, we will reach 590 gigawatt of solar. And that's up from 140 gigawatt today, so up to 590 gigawatt. So that's 4 times more without any ambitions in any way. But what the world needs today and what we hope we will get from the leaders in Glasgow is a 1.5 degrees Celsius pathway. And as we explained just right now, we do think that we need a 45% renewables goal to get us there. What would that mean in terms of solar? It would mean we would have to install 870 gigawatt of solar. So not just the business as usual, which would already take us to 580 gigawatt, 590 gigawatt, but 870 gigawatt. Now, looking at what the member states are pledging today to install, they want to install around about 330 gigawatt of solar by 2030. That's according to the current renewables goal. But what we see, and I've talked about reality overtaking us, is that already in 2025 we will see these capacities being installed, not only in 2030. And looking at the European Commission's impact assessment for the 40% renewables target, the solar capacity which is forecasted under this scenario is around about 480 gigawatts. So that's 100 gigawatts short of what we see anyway happening without a higher ambition. Jacek, obviously I need to ask you, more than 100 gigawatt less you are envisaging in a more ambitious scenario. So why is it that solar is so much underestimated still, even given the exponential growth we are seeing today? And do you have any advice for us? What can we do in order to change this perception?
Thanks, Walburga. I mean, as I said, I was not involved in this particular modeling, but I assume there's a number of assumptions regarding, for example, cost decreases and technological progress that probably are different in the primes modeling that was applied to the Commission proposals and what you're doing. And I think personally, in my previous career working on energy efficiency, I spent a lot of time discussing with the consultants that run this model the assumptions relevant to energy efficiency, and I think they are open to evidence-based arguments. And so if you can show to them that some of the assumptions that they used may not fully reflect market expectations, then I mean what was tabled was already tabled, of course, but for future iterations and so on, I think the best is to engage probably via the Commission services running those modeling exercises. So you have to look into the economic analysis units of DG Klima and DG Ener, and through that channel you can probably engage in a discussion with the modeling experts that do that work.
Thanks, Jacek. Indeed, we are engaging with your colleagues in the European Commission. Ulrich, apart from targets, what else do we need in order to propel us on a 1.5 degrees Celsius pathway? Could you unmute yourself?
What we certainly have to understand is that the manufacturing is just one part of the equation, and that the installation, which we have seen from the study, is creating the most part of the jobs. does not only need qualifications, but it need just pure manpower. And here I see the bottleneck coming towards us quite heavily in the coming years if we do not understand to make that first more attractive and probably more comparable, ask ourselves really whether we are talking to technicians only when it comes to PV installation jobs. Here I would think that we have not really proven to be innovative enough in order to meet that challenge. I'm not afraid with regard to the manufacturing base. We have very broad R&D related engineering base in Europe, which is at hand to jump on that, very attractive because renewable, sustainable, fancy new job offerings. That I think is easily doable. I would rather be skeptical with regard to the deployment area. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Ulrich. And the deployment, that's because of permitting bottlenecks and because of
yeah, well, certainly we have not seen the regulatory framework for those masses of installation rates. And as I said, I think that other countries and other regions with their regulatory framework will tell us that this is possible and it is necessary. And I would rather see Europe being being the forerunner for this development than rather being following suit. What it certainly needs is the clarification of the regulatory framework on a national level, the easing of the administrative support that is needed, especially in the residential area. It also needs the creation of a framework for having young people choose to become an installation operator. Operation and maintenance is something that we see already being quite well established. That may grow out of itself, but the deployment masses that are coming towards us, I'm really asking myself who's going to put all those PV on rooftops in the next years. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You just mentioned manufacturing. Let us zoom in a little bit on manufacturing. Sure. Here. Solar will provide the major share of energy in Europe. That's for sure. So solar will be basically the new oil or gas or whatever you would want to call it, with the beauty compared to it that apart from the CO2 emissions, which we don't have compared to oil and gas, that we will also not depend on imports when it comes to the energy sources anymore. But we also don't want to rely fully on imports when it comes to panels, to cells, to all kinds of elements which we need in order to produce solar in Europe. And Ulrich, SMA is a manufacturer of inverters, amongst others. You already mentioned the very strong R&D environment in Europe, but not every product which we need in Europe is today also produced in Europe. When it comes to inverters, fortunately, the picture is a bright one, consistently a very strong hold. But the tide is turning, and we see new investments in EU manufacturing along the whole value chain. But we need to scale up very quickly, so we really need a significant share of solar production across the whole value chain. In the European Solar Initiative, we're calling for 20 gigawatt of solar produced in Europe by 2025. So what is it that we need in order to get there, Ulrich?
First of all, let me repeat that I think that it is doable, and that we shouldn't be afraid of thinking along this way, to have a known production base, an industry base in Europe, which is able to deliver 20 gigawatts by 2025. I think it's easily doable. As you mentioned, there has been a broad base for inverters. We see with Meyer Burger in Germany, etc., also other companies in the module sector again trying to invest. And perhaps it is helpful to understand that SMA just a few years ago decided or was forced to decide whether to put it in its entire R&D and manufacturing base either into China or consolidated in Germany. And we thought about that for quite a long time and ultimately decided it to bring it all into Germany and Poland in order to leverage on the well-educated talent that we would find here, and in order to grasp the momentum of the growing markets in Europe. So I think there is industry strategy rationale for deploying such manufacturing capacities. The next steps that we would embrace as a company, as an investor, would of course be to have, let's first of all, a clear investment case, meaning if the Commission is setting the framework for the 45% RES target, that would of course be helpful in order to have security for investments being taken. Second, with regard to the investments that are necessary, we would also welcome some incentives. To build a 100 million factory in the middle of Germany today is not being easily done, with the margins being under pressure from competition on the global scale. That is something that is a particularity feature of our industry, that the large margins are not done up the value chain, but down the value chain. And manufacturing is working on very slim margins today. And in order to make them invest in new production capacities in Europe, that would probably need support, not only with regard to the framework, but also directly.
Mm-hmm. So higher ambitions, higher renewable ambitions are definitely supporting manufacturing in Europe. And we still can rely on skills we have here in Europe. Jacek, Commissioner Breton, your commissioner, supporting the European Solar Initiative. So what's the further strategy? We have been discussing just a couple of days ago during the EU Sustainable Energy Week on this topic. Is energy security playing a major role in your thinking about a future strategy?
Thanks, Walburga. Yes, well, absolutely. I think what you mentioned about resilience and the value, our today's dependence on gas will transform in the future into our potential dependence on things like wafers and ingots, which we already have today. But the situation is that for the moment, from what I see, it's not something, well, China is not Russia in that sense that China will not suddenly stop exporting those components due to political reasons. However, having 98% dependence on a single country for a crucial component for our economy, it's always a risk. Even if it's hard to measure it, if it's a long-term intangible risk, this is a risk. And I think this is recognized in the Commission, different policy initiatives, in the industrial strategy, in the recent communication on energy prices and costs, which you referred to, Walburga. We explicitly say in that communication that in order to increase our future resilience, we have to also develop indigenous EU manufacturing throughout the value chain. So I think here we are working on different initiatives. I mean, in the next year there will be a communication from the Commission specifically targeting the PV sector, and there I hope we will include a number of policy options, policy proposals that can also act not only on the deployment but also on the manufacturing. And I heard, in the recent debates with the industry, I heard the main avenues such as of course, supporting innovation, because it will be difficult to compete with China on price. So we have to compete on innovation. But then once this innovation is already close to market or is ready to be marketed, you still need maybe market terms, but de-risked financing to upscale your production. You mentioned permitting. Permitting is relevant not only in the context of deployment, but also manufacturing in terms of, access to land for building a factory and so on. So I think all of this is duly acknowledged by the Commission, different strategic, let's say, documents, and now the challenge is to transform it into some actionable points that we can take, some actionable elements that we could deploy together with member states. And just let me conclude. I think to come back to what Ulrich was saying, that the key challenge will be for the deployment, how to, in the context of our discussion today on jobs, how to get all these people to deploy the PVs. I think it will be a challenge, because if you look at the macroeconomic environment we are operating in today, it's a very tight labor market with skills shortages in many sectors. Different economists project that this will continue. So, and I think here we will be competing also with other sectors that we have to upscale. For example, building renovations. We want to double the renovation rate of buildings in the EU. Of course, there are synergies with deployment of a rooftop PVs here. But still, I think this still has to be translated into, fully acknowledged and translated into support schemes for upskilling, reskilling, and so on. And here I just would like to point that the Commission is also working on a communication on the social aspect of the energy transition. And I think this specific point has to also feature there in the document. Thank you.
Thanks very much for referring indeed to the social aspects of energy transition. And you mentioned rooftops. I would like to zoom in on rooftops a little. As you've seen in the presentation of Raffaele, a true job creating machine, basically. So it's much more jobs than utility scale solar, much more jobs, the most intensive job creator when it comes to also comparing it to other energy sectors. So a lot of jobs. You've also seen Poland is leading, as well as Germany, 2 countries when it comes to these jobs. Are there any plans to unlock this potential? So using the roofs, which, by the way, is not just a top potential, but it's also a huge potential when it comes to producing electricity and to involving citizens in the energy transition. Jacek, you mentioned the communication on solar energy. Maybe there's some spot for a solar rooftop wave, or also including indeed some elements in the social aspects of the energy transition document coming up. So how can we unlock this potential?
Yes, thanks, Walburga. Indeed, these are the 2 relevant documents, future initiatives where we will want to address it. For the moment, I don't have any answers how we can do it. I think we are watching with interest, for example, the current debates that are ongoing in Germany as part of the coalition discussions, where these aspects of rooftop installation is very hotly debated, and there are very diverging views. So I think we will also want to draw conclusions from that. But for the moment, I think we are at the stage where we would rather also ask for example, the industry, the market operators, what are the most practical ways we could address that. Thanks.
Ulrich, looking at that picture, our guests are seeing here the real brain behind these installations on roofs. That's the inverters, and they're getting smarter and smarter, taking over more and more tasks. Safety, control, energy services, managing self-consumption. So you're very much involved in rooftop systems. So what does it need to speed up and to get more solar on our roofs, hence also increasing the jobs we have in this sector?
Yeah. Well, in the future, we will not only be selling modules plus inverters plus cabling. It will always be integrated systems on a plug-and-play basis, and those systems will be able and necessarily be able to steer the triangle in between the PV generator, the storage device that we will find in almost any household, and the grid. And therefore, it becomes very dominant to resolve any question surrounding the question behind the meter, in front of the meter, who is actually giving the necessary framework for metering in order to stabilize the grid, especially if we talk about 45% RES. That becomes a more and more pressing question, that we are giving the industry its strengths in order to deal with that issue, and do not lame ourselves, do not decelerate the activities that the industry could unfold with regard to this challenge of stabilizing and supporting the grid. So here again, regulatory framework, and I do not talk about even more. It may be helpful to have sometimes less framework in order to unleash the full potential that the industry could unleash.
And I see we're already running slightly over time. So one last question on the potential, on the skills we need, but also on the potential bottlenecks we're running into if we are not able to convince people to adapt and work in our sector, to reskill, to upskill. So we need a lot of skilled workers. That's what we've shown today with the job study. Ulrich, when it comes to inverters, what we've also seen is that you're providing a lot of jobs, but I know that SMA is also investing a lot into skilling people and into having the right skills available for your activities. So what is the situation you're looking at? Do you already have identified gaps? And what are you doing in order to deal with these gaps and overcome those?
Yeah, I think what we have to face is, when we're talking about an industrial strategy and about a manufacturing base in Europe regarding to PV, we're not talking about electrical engineers only. We are talking about software engineers, about IT engineers. Today we are employing as many software engineers as electrical engineers, actually, because IT security will become a very decisive factor. Even if we can rely on Far East sources for some time, over time, we will be willing to be self-sufficient in Europe, not only with regard to resilience or security of supply, but also with regard to IT security. So these STEM jobs do very much get into focus. And what we see is that there is a huge interest of young job entrants with a professional background to deal with whatever is sustainable from every angle, point of angle. So the interest to come even to a remote German location like Kassel, where we are headquartered, is given the moment these job rookies understand that this is a company that has a perspective and is truly and meaningfully sustainable in what it's doing. So and that encompasses also questions like gender diversity, for instance, where of course companies which have a very clear focus on engineering have had difficulties in the past, something which needs to be overcome, but also gives opportunities.
Indeed, that's one aspect we didn't touch upon yet, that solar is the most gender balanced or more diverse energy technology compared to other energy technologies, but still we're at 32% women in our sector, and we still need to improve, but it's already much better compared to other sectors in the energy area. Jacek, is the European Commission developing training strategies in order to also take advantage of the potential we have to, for example, reskill workers from coal, from fossil sectors, from coal, for example, to solar workers? And one of the studies which has been developed by the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, shows that there is a great opportunity to reskill these workers. So is the European Commission developing any training strategies and comes up with investments into upskilling and reskilling?
Thanks, Olburga. Yeah, I think we are doing a lot of elements. Maybe you could say that the approach is too piecemeal, but again, I'm not an expert here, so I don't want to judge what my colleagues do. I just know that, you know, for example, as part of the Just Transition Fund deployment, this fund is specifically targeting those areas in the EU that will bear the highest cost, let's say, of moving away from coal and gas to a more green economy. And as part of that fund deployment, and here we talk about several billion euros again, one of the key elements is upskilling and reskilling and making sure that people in those regions can shift to new sectors. We also have, of course, the Erasmus program, part of which is about vocational training. We have the European Social Fund. The question is to what extent, of course, all of this is sufficiently coordinated and part of a strong long-term vision, because coming back to our discussion about modeling, all these models which underpin the policy making make certain assumptions, and they make notably assumptions about access to capital, access to skills, and so on. And of course, this will not happen magically. And so, of course, in the EU, we are a market-based economy, and it should remain that way because it's an efficient way of doing business. But you almost need something like I don't want to use the term wartime type planning, but you need a good plan. You need to understand precisely what will be happening across the economy during this transition and where the shortages will be. So I think there is scope to maybe include all of these different things that we're doing as part of a broader strategy, as part of a clear vision, and making sure that all of these elements fit together. Thanks.
Ulrich, yes.
Jacek, if I would just, if you would allow me to just plant some ideas into your thinking within DG Grow, I think it's time to really think about vocational training and framing a new job of a solar installer, a solar stoller, or a solar operator, which might be very attractive to young people of both sexes, as it combines the perspective of running independently in its own business on a renewable job basis, with all elements of technological background, the business background, and marketing and administrative aspects alike. So I think that this new job title, this new job family, could create demand and could then bring very many young people to jump on that. So if DG Grow could foster something in that direction, that would be certainly welcomed.
So
thank you.
I would love to continue discussing with you, but we are slightly running over time already. What I take is it needs a good plan, and this plan should also include indeed vocational training with new jobs which are marketed to the job seekers. And we hope that many of the elements we discussed today we will be seeing in the upcoming solar communication. So it was very, very good to discuss these elements already today. I would like to hand back now to Michael. Thanks very much for joining us, Ulrich and Jacek. It was a pleasure discussing with you, and I am looking forward to continuing the discussions.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ulrich. Thanks, Jacek. Just one final sentence, maybe a key takeaway, which I would like to give everyone home, if maybe you're even still home working like me. In any case, please remember, EU solar jobs will not only be the key to Paris climate goals, which is why we have to invest much more and much faster, as we also discussed and learned from the study now. But our overall ambition must be really to improve European energy security by investing also in solar manufacturing jobs. for the technology that one already adds more power generation capacity per year than any other today, and second, that will also shoulder the major responsibility of keeping European lights on in the long run. That brings us back to the title of the report, Towards Higher Solar Ambition in Europe. You can download it now on our website. Please go there, and it's freely available. And it brings me also to say thank you again to the Fleric Business School for their report, creating the mathematical model, which enables us now to calculate and publish such a job report every year. And I would also like to say thank you to the panelists for the lively and in-depth discussion, and to you on the screen for joining us. Thanks again. We wish you a nice rest of the day, and bye-bye.